to you.
Okay, thanks, Angus. Okay, so I shall share screens. And hopefully everybody can see the slides. Okay, so greetings from Brisbane. It's about 6 p.m. here. As Angus said, 9 a.m. in the UK, and I think it's from 1 a.m. onwards in America. So I'm incredibly impressed to see Americans in the crowd. I was not expecting that. The session's being recorded. It's great to be at the Lean Higher Ed conference. It would be even better to be in Scotland, but we can't help these things. Hopefully everyone will get to Australia next year. Did that work? Okay, so I want to start with an Australian custom, which is an acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land that I'm on. There were over 200 different Aboriginal nations, or mobs as they sometimes call themselves. And the two that were custodians of the land where Brisbane is today are the Yagara and the Turrbal people. Aborigines had lived on this land for somewhere between 60,000 to 100,000 years as the oldest civilization on Earth. And so I acknowledge their custodianship and I pay my respect to Aboriginal elders past and present. Okay, there it is. So the title of my presentation is Do What You Can From Where You Are. It introduces a model from a book that I wrote and had published earlier this year. So in this presentation, I'll take you through the thinking that kind of led to the model, show it to you, and then talk about the behaviors that I think are really integral to it. So I've been learning about problem solving and business improvement for a long time. And in more recent years, the Lean Higher Ed community has become a really significant part of that. So my own journey started probably 6-7 years ago in a change program at the University of Queensland. I got to work with Mark Robinson from Lean St Andrews. At around that time, I read Bill Bolz's Lean Higher Education, Volume 1. I remember really enjoying this and thinking it would be great to be able to progress Lean in higher ed. Certainly for my university, it seemed to be what people really wanted. About 5 years ago, I did a master's in leadership. My undergraduate is HR, and I've had a long-term interest in leadership. I did a research project as part of that, and that work ended up sort of forming my chapter in Steve Yorkstone's book, Global Lean for Higher Education. And then I was incredibly excited to see my chapter in Steve's book quoted in Bill's Lean Higher Education Volume 2nd edition. I felt like, yes, I'm actually getting somewhere with making a contribution and getting to meet and interact with people from all over the world who are really engaged in all of this. That thinking also, some of the work from my master's informed then my own much more humble, smaller book, Collaborative Problem Solving, a Guide to Improving Your Workplace. And even that kind of came from Lean Higher Ed, because when I was at the conference in Ann Arbor a couple of years ago, I met Meredith Norwich from Routledge, had a conversation with her at that conference, and that actually led to me deciding to put together a proposal to finally write a book. Angus and I were talking before this presentation about how people intend to do these things and never do, and you need prompts along the way to make them happen. And I just also want to acknowledge Karen Kusler, another member of the LHE network. I've had some great conversations with Karen over the years about really about technology and the impact that it has on people and tech projects. And Karen co-authored a section of the book on technology making or automation making problems visible. Okay, so this is part of the background to what I was thinking. Improvement programs fail a lot, depending on the research. Anywhere from 50 to 90% of enterprise-wide programs are said to fail. And there's and more reasons than just these two that are typically given, but that the kind of the top two reasons are leadership does not commit, and then also employees resist the change. Really doesn't make sense to me when I think about my own interest in problem solving and making things better, and the attitudes of all the people who I work with, who all actually want things to improve. I don't think I know anybody who would come into work and willfully not want something to get better. So even when the programs fail, as they sometimes do, I don't think it's really because the people don't want things to do better. And that made me think, well, what can one do? And so I thought about individuals and small teams rather than enterprise-wide systems, and thought there must be an awful lot of people sitting in organizations that don't have successful improvement programs in place who want things to be better. And they look around and say, well, how can I make a difference? What can I do from where I sit today? And so I wrote this book very much with these people in mind. It's intended to be a guide that kind of anybody can pick up and read and start to practice the things every day. Small things can make quite a difference, to yourself and to the people around you. And so there's a few different ideas that I sort of had been thinking about that all kind of formed or informed the model. So this is from 4 Types of Problems by Art Smalley, and he comes from Toyota. And so there is, Toyota language in here. The 4 types of problems are on the right-hand side, so troubleshooting, gap from standard, target condition, and open-ended. The thing that I found interesting about this is that the red line through the middle is the current standard. So it's agreed this is where we should be. So troubleshooting and gap from standard are where you're not maintaining an agreed standard. And I think most people would say, well, okay, that's a problem. But then the other 2 types of problems that he describes are target condition and open-ended, which are really, how do you get to the next level? And I think a lot of people would say, well, actually, that's not a problem, that's improvement, that's continuous improvement. And so I thought it was interesting that really what you might call a problem and what you might call an opportunity are actually all part of the same continuum. And the way you go about addressing either of these things is actually very similar. So I guess one of the ideas that I really wanted to get across in the book and in the model that I've put together is that whether you call it a problem or an opportunity, it doesn't matter. They're really part of the same thing and can be approached in a similar way. So these problems and opportunities exist inside organizations of different sizes and complexity. Of course, we all work in organizations. And they got me thinking, well, okay, at a fundamental level, what would you say an organization is? So I've sort of boiled it down to a fairly simple sort of description. The arrangement of people into specific roles and teams in order to achieve more than one person can on their own, is literally the organizing of people, along with, financial, physical and intellectual resources. And you see this in an organization chart, you see this in role descriptions. And so people go to work every day and they interact with each other in order to achieve more. So because we're talking about people and I'm focusing on non-manufacturing settings, there's a lot of material out there already on manufacturing. People who work in offices or in knowledge organizations where the primary driver of the work is the individual's knowledge and effort. Behavior is actually incredibly important about making an organization run. And so in my model, I really wanted to focus on what are the behaviors that are vital to success, and fundamental to people interacting. And then thinking about this a bit more, well, okay, so you have people in organizations doing things, and well, how would you describe what those people do? And so the answer that I settled on is, well, they do processes. Organizations have got hundreds of processes and they've got loads of different people doing them. And so if you've ever used a swim lane process map like this, each role in a process occupies its own lane. The role never leaves the lane, but the process moves between lanes as it's handed over from one person or one role to another. And as you map processes, you see very clearly the interaction between the person in the role and the tool that they might use to perform a particular step, actually doing that step. And you actually capture all of that in the map. So you use the icons for reports or systems or whatever else. And it's a really good visual of people using tools, to complete steps to do things. And again, because it's people working together, the behaviors that they demonstrate when they're doing that are going to be really important. So I thought all of this would actually be a really good way to describe problem solving. Like if I could put together a model that kind of had these things as the underpinnings, it would make sense to people who maybe haven't been exposed to process improvement or problem solving before. Because anybody who works in an organization, implicitly knows they go to work and they complete tasks using tools to do things, and they do exhibit behaviors and they interact with other people, and they all do it to achieve more than they could on their own. So I thought if I could come up with a model that kind of is underpinned by this, it'd be accessible to people and they would feel more encouraged and kind of, inclined to start using it themselves, not be afraid of it because it seems like something that's going to be too complex or too hard to do. And so here it is. Here's what I've come up with. I've got this. I actually have this on two separate slides because I wasn't sure how legible it would be talking about it all on one slide. But I've basically got the diagram to the left with the different levels of it, and then a whole bunch of tools underneath it. So if I just go to the next one, it's three circles, basically layers that build on top of each other. The innermost circle is a pretty basic problem-solving model. Somebody perceives a problem, you define it, investigate, select, implement, or review. Because of that idea of problems and opportunities all existing along one continuum, you can go around it more than once. It's not just you fix it once and it goes away. I know with Six Sigma that the thinking is you solve the problem so it goes away forever. But I think, when you consider raising up to a new standard or doing things radically differently to try to get much better results, it can actually be an iterative process. The middle row in this model I've just called tools, the middle circle, only because there were so many different ones that I mentioned that it would have been incredibly cluttered to try to do it all in this. And then the outer level of the three behaviors that I've ended up talking about in the book. So curiosity, collaboration, and evidence-based thinking. I'll talk about each of those a bit later on as well. And I don't talk about it in the presentation, but I included a section in my book on how these behaviors actually also relate to a number of contemporary leadership models. So people who intentionally practice these things in the workplace are also displaying the sort of behaviors that modern or contemporary research and thinking tells us people want from their leaders. I think that's going to make people more inclined to be drawn to you and to actually be willing to participate in things that they might not otherwise want to, be so inclined to participate in. And so here's all the tools that I list. So I've just stretched out the circle into a straight line across the top. It was a bit of a challenge in writing the book because a lot of things that you use in problem solving, you don't use just in one spot and not again. You use a fishbone diagram or an A3 statement throughout the entire process. But I wrote the book, basically had to introduce everything at some point, and I didn't want an enormous chapter one and then much smaller chapters later. So I tried to spread them out and sort of explained that throughout as well, that, that it's not one thing is used in one spot. It's certainly not an exhaustive list. There's some things in here that I've sort of made up myself over time. Other things that, they're commonly available on the internet. And I really wanted to make the point that everything that you use in problem solving is actually intended to be used with other people. You can sit down and do something on your own, but you're, I would think, unlikely to properly define the problem if you try to do it in isolation, unlikely to come up with the best options, when it comes to getting a solution. And I've found in my own practice over the years, using even very simple tools can actually be very powerful. If you sit down with someone with, say, a fishbone diagram, bit of an explanation as to how it works, and then let's start getting things down on the page. Let's start talking about what are the different issues and how they might fit in. Pretty much every time, by the end of it, the person has said, "Oh, this is a really good tool. I like this. I would use this again." Which is, I think, a really good result, and part of then building that longer term relationship. I've included a chapter in the book down the bottom, the additional tools for responding to other people's behaviour, which, again, I don't go into this morning, but you may have encountered this as well. Sometimes people do react in unexpected ways. It doesn't mean that they're bad people or that they resist change. There's all sorts of reasons why people might not want to engage immediately, or they might be wary. Previous experiences in other workplaces. So I've just tried to provide some frames to think about why people might be responding to you the way that they are, and a few tools as to how to analyze that and what you can do in thinking about your own response to it, which again, I think, is helpful for building that sort of long-term trust. Okay, so the 3 behaviors, the first one's curiosity. So this is really, it is simply a desire to know. You have to understand a problem in order to be able to solve it. And again, if you think about an office environment, the way you get information about problems is largely by talking to other people. You can get data that might point to a problem, but to really understand it, you've got to get the people together and discuss it. So you need to have ways of drawing the information out of them. And so it's curiosity about what's happening, and also curiosity about the people in order to establish the trust relationship. I'm sure you'll recognize this in Lean. The go and see, ask why, show respect, and respect for people. The use of tools like 5 whys, which is a structured questioning approach to try to drill deeper and deeper into something. Edgar Schein has written quite a lot on, he's had a kind of a long train of thought over decades, from process consultation through to his books on helping, and then in the last 10 years, humble inquiry and humble leadership. And he describes humble inquiry as the fine art of drawing someone out, of asking questions to which you do not already know the answer, and of building a relationship based on curiosity and interest in the person. So again, it's very much about respecting the individual, finding out something about them, not just, okay, tell us about the problem, let's have a look at this specific thing, but making it a more rounded experience and building a deeper relationship. And certainly if you work, probably many of the people attending the conference work in process improvement teams in universities. If you can build that trust relationship, you can get into what's known as deep help. So I think it's Therese, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, Amabile or Amabile, who talks about deep help as something that happens over time, grounded in a trust relationship where you can actually start to build a richer and richer helping relationship with another person or a team. And curiosity through sharing is something that I've found very useful as well. And a colleague of mine does this incredibly effectively. So you'll ask him a question and he'll give you an answer and he'll give you a little bit of seemingly unrelated information. And he does that deliberately just to see if it sparks something. And he's sort of given examples of really interesting kind of new relationships and new opportunities that have formed out of basically just giving a little bit more. Okay, so collaboration. So, I mean, I know saying collaboration is a behavior to use in a collaborative model, you know, sounds a bit a bit obvious. I guess I went back and forth on lots of different words in doing this, and read up quite a lot and tried to land on a word. And in the end, I did land on collaboration as a kind of an overarching word for really what I think are four different types of ways of interacting with people around problem solving. So helping, teaching, coaching, and doing. I've got some short snippets on the screen about that. Helping, again, kind of comes from Edgar Schein. He's written a lot of stuff about helping and about helping it being intrinsic to organizations. And so again, if you think back to an organization as people getting together to do more than one person can on their own, helping has to be embedded in that to make it happen. And so problem solving is actually a really good form of organizational helping, because you're helping a person or a team to understand something and to improve it, which improves not only the quality of the work being done, but hopefully also includes the quality of the working life of the people who had been grappling with that problem or with that poor process, or whatever it might be. Teaching, it's fairly obvious, showing someone how to do something, imparting useful knowledge to people. Coaching is can be either directive, which is very much here's how you do it, or self-reflective, which is probably more what people understand coaching to be. And then finally doing, which is the hands-on, let's get out the paper and the post-it notes, let's solve this together, which is an awful lot of fun, and certainly was always my favorite part of any job I've had as a process improvement person. I love the doing. I love getting people together in a room and getting that shared understanding and really getting into the nuts and bolts of the problem. I guess the thing there is to make sure that you don't take over. It should be a learning experience for the team, and really the solutions have to come from the team, because they are the ones who ultimately will implement it and live with the results. So I just thought these were good different aspects of collaborative behavior. And the way you approach any of this is going to be situational, depending on what the problem is, the maturity of the team, where things are at. And then the third behavior is evidence-based thinking. So this, or rather I should say, curiosity and collaboration come up in leadership models, or variations on them come up in leadership models a lot. And there's a very strong, correlation in, say, authentic leadership or transformational leadership with those. I was a little surprised to find that evidence-based thinking really doesn't come up in leadership theory. I thought it should. It's probably implicit in ideas of fair decision-making and transparency and those sort of things. But certainly for problem solving, I mean, evidence-based thinking, it reinforces the process, challenges you to find reliable data and not just go with opinions. And certainly my experience of say, running rapid improvement events in universities is that, which typically are on non-academic processes. In universities, we're very good at measuring our students, and we're very good at measuring our research outputs, and we're not that good at measuring our internal processes. And so often what you find is an information gap, where you find, somebody says, well, I think it's this, and someone else thinks it's that, and you may or may not have some data, and it may or may not be rubbery. And so usually what I end up doing is saying, well, let's acknowledge the information gap. Let's say, here's what we know. In the action plan to move to the future state, we have to close that gap. So somehow we have to have a way of capturing the data and looking at it over time. Otherwise, there's a real risk of backsliding, right? You can say you're going to implement something, you do it, but how do you even know if you're getting the results that you want, and how do you know you're sustaining them over time if you've got nothing, to measure against? I think evidence-based thinking, challenges you to truly understand the problem. Okay, and then I just wanted to talk about so tools for collaboration are really about collaborating with each other, but also tools work very well together. And so, a fishbone diagram, a Pareto analysis, and an A3 statement will get you a long way down the road in solving something. But I use the example of a swim lane process map or a process map because it's so incredibly versatile, and over time you can add so much richness to the interactions. So, you can do your high-level simple map to scope the process. You can do your detailed map with people to get that shared understanding. Introduce 8 wastes, the 4 voices, and they're the voice of the customer, voice of the business, voice of the employee, and then also the voice of the process, which is the metrics. And just on that, I guess what I found over time is that voice of the employee is often sort of not thought about, but it's actually a really important one. It's the voice of the people working in the process. So what is their experience of the process? And I found that's a good way to get people on side, because if you can say, well, okay, sure, your customers say that there's a problem with this process, but what's your experience of it? I mean, if you're annoyed by it as well, it's actually in everybody's interest to work on it. So I found the 4 voices to be good. Run as repeat as strangers. Repeatability and reproducibility is a little bit of Six Sigma, but again, you can work that in. You can see the things on the list there. I think what I really like too about a process map is how well it relates to a RACI chart, and how the RACI can then be used to reinforce who does what, keeps the work moving between the lanes when it should. And I'm actually really getting into customer journey maps. So you have your process map, you sit down with a customer. We're doing this in my own school with onboarding. So a couple of weeks into somebody's, starting with the school, I'll meet with them, show them the map. Here's what I think you've been through. Let's talk about your experience at each of these steps. And then from that, you can write little user stories that you give back to the people who are responsible for those steps. And it's not Chris, the manager, complaining. It's, Fred or Mary or whoever, the new staff member, saying, this specific thing happened. Here's what we might be able to do about it. And so just as one example of that with onboarding, we had a new staff member start. We actually had an error, really, that we didn't order their new computer on time. So, and computers are incredibly delayed. I don't know if it's the same everywhere in the world. Apparently there's a microchip shortage, and it now takes 5 months for a university to get a computer. So, so although it's a waste, I'm actually getting some inventory. I'm buying a stack of them to have as a buffer, because we're just not there yet. But anyway, what it meant was that she needed some IT support. So the IT person came to visit. When I did the customer journey map with her, she raved about how good it was that IT dropped by. In 10 minutes, they sorted out a whole bunch of problems she had around using Outlook, accessing the software center to download things. Wouldn't it be great if every new person got a visit from IT? So I spoke to the IT manager, and he agreed to trial that. But again, it sort of came from starting with the map, building on it, adding all these things to it, and adding kind of richness over time. And collaborating with people around it. If I hadn't made the time to speak to the new starter, I wouldn't have thought of that. Okay, and then finally, I just wanted to talk about behavior in collaboration as well. So again, relating back to the swim lane process map and all the things that you can do with it, be curious about the process and the problems in it. Ask the questions, drill for the data, get that shared understanding with people. It's and be collaborative, but be aware of which role you're playing, the helping, teaching, coaching, and doing. be ready to move between them. I think this is really an important part of facilitating a problem-solving process, is having that awareness and just making sure that you have the knowledge transfer and that you have the team, you know, really being prepared to own the solution, because they will be the ones living with it. And of course, being evidence-based in their approach, in your approach rather. So Steve, in the presentation on RACI by Steve Yorkstone and Eva Malone, Steve said something that I thought was really nice. So I hope I'm quoting him correctly. We take the implicit and make it explicit. We make it seen in a way that people can interact with it sensibly in a group so they can make wiser decisions. And I thought, yes, that's very Steve. I like that. The way I describe it to people is that doing this is all about creating a shared understanding of what is happening in order to work out what to do about it and to get buy-in from people on those next steps, which you, as you know, possibly as the person facilitating the problem solving, won't be involved in and won't be living with. Okay, so that's the end of my content. I should plug the book. Routledge have given me a discount code, FLR40. If you buy it from Routledge, you get 20% off the price and free delivery. They have, it's on Amazon, Booktopia, lots of other places, so shop around. If you do decide to buy it, that's great. Please do not buy the hard copy. They are incredibly expensive. They're like 4 times the price of the paperback. So I'm very happy if people just buy the paperback. And so there is a website, Collaborative Problem. I've got some content on there. I need to put more on there. I've been a bit slow to get going on that. And there's my email address and also my my LinkedIn. Very happy to connect with people. And finally, hope to see you in Melbourne next year. So I think I